guys. Okay, so part 4, it was going to be a part 3 series, but you know, for those of you that know me, know how I like to prattle on. So we've gotten into part 4. So for those that didn't see it, part 1 is all about structure and how you set up your actual validation system. Part 2 is about post-validation. So how you actually go about doing validation of completed assessment tools, how you choose them and things like that. That's something that a lot of RTOs really just don't do well, so please make sure you've had a read of that one. 3 was validating theory, pre-validation, so like validation of the structure of theory assessments, and I did actually spend a fair bit of time talking about how we actually go about designing theory assessments as well, and some of the things that get picked up at ASQA audits and TAC audits and things like that. So this is going to be about practical assessments and how we validate practical assessments, and similar to what I said in the other video, like validation, pre-validation should be going hand in hand with the actual assessment design and with the reassessment process and things like that. I never design a practical, or I never design an assessment period without literally having the mapping guide open on the next page, and I'm constantly like going back and checking. And so I might design a practical assessment. So a good example, I've just been writing WHS. And so, you know, one of the things that the students had to do for a WHS assessment was to review the current WHS policy and system, and then make recommendations as to whether or not the current policy was compliant to the legislation and the regulators, and whether or not it covered like the key areas. So for example, how to do a risk assessment and how to put in place a hazard control, how to respond to an incident accident, and providing information about the responsibilities of the, you know, the duty holder, like the duty holder, the worker, and everything like that. So, and then this was, I mean, the ones that I was doing one contextualized for East Coast and one contextualized for WA. So the practical assessment that I was designing for the first one was the review of this policy and procedure. It was assisting in the policy, it was resisting in the policy review, because it's a Cert 4, it's like a Cert 4 level. So, you know, as I'm writing the criteria for like what needs to be in the policy review and how that policy review needs to get evidence. So in this case, we were taking the policy and they were either doing a physical like hand markup, or they were taking the doc form and then they were doing a track changes with comments, just depending on like which policy they were using, because one was a work-based policy and one was a one was like a sample policy. So as I said, like as I'm going through and doing my checklist, so first of all, like the first piece of evidence I've got for that practical is I've actually got like a physical supporting document. So if I'm doing practical assessments, like as in go and make a salad, I always have something like a job card where the student like plans out what the task is. They tell me what the task is, when they're doing the task, where they're doing the task, what ingredients they're using or what equipment they're using and things like that. And then they do like kind of like a quick check and go, right, what are the hazards I need to consider during this assessment? So anytime I do a practical assessment, I have my job card as like that additional supporting evidence that the students fill out, which gives me all of my context and everything like that. And then when I'm doing ones that are more like workplace based, then I'll have like the policy. So for this one, the indirect evidence is going to be the policy procedure, and it's going to be that physical track changes document, and then within that there's going to then be a separate checklist. Okay, so for this practical assessment, as I said, like as I'm writing each of the criteria, I'm kind of going, okay, so let's say for example they've got to identify the legislation. I've gone and like here, okay, so they've got to identify the legislation, and then I put in brackets or we put in gray or whatever. So we've got like, here's what the student sees. So the student sees the criteria of, you need to identify the WHS legislation, okay, within the document. And so, and then in parentheses next to that, which is only in my assessment marking guide, I'm going to see, you know, the actual legislation. So, you know, the Commonwealth legislation, and then I'm going to see like a breakdown of the state legislation and things like that. When it comes to other tasks, like as again I said, make a salad, the first task might be to wash the lettuce. Okay, I'm going to be like, you know, prepare ingredients, and so it might be, you know, for example, wash the lettuce, make sure that you're using the correct board, make sure that you're make sure that the knife is sharp, make sure that they've got gloves on, make sure when they're when they're slicing the tomato, that the tomato is, of this particular distance or something like that, or thickness. Sorry for all the chefs out there that are just dying right now. But basically, like, what I want to see is like, I want the student to see kind of the criteria that they have to hit. And then the trainer is then going to see the benchmark that sits next to it of like what that looks like as when it's done well, right? So, if I'm saying that they've got to make sure they're wearing correct PPE, yeah, you can just put there, like, for the student, all they need to know is that they need to wear correct PPE. And then for the trainer, we kind of go, right, well, the correct PPE is X, Y, and Z, right? So every trainer is making the same decision as to what the correct PPE is, or what the correct presentation is. And then, as I've said, we've also, in addition to that, so that's our direct evidence of what the trainer is actually physically seeing, and they're ticking that off. So we've got it, we've covered it, it's valid, and then we've also made sure that it's reliable because we've got our benchmarks there, and then we've got our indirect evidence. And when you're doing validation, if all you have is a tick and flick list, it's so hard to actually like put your hand on your heart and go, yeah, definitely done, like 100% done. And like, it sounds horrible, and please don't take this as like I don't trust trainers or anything like that, but I've just seen too many trainers and organizations do the wrong thing. And like, sometimes the trainers are really like, they're a brilliant trainer, but then when it comes to practical assessment, they're kind of just going, yeah, but I know, like, they've done it. And I'm like, well, what have they done? Like, I'll be honest, most people will take shortcuts and get lazy over time. And like, if you aren't held to a standard, there's a lot of people who just won't hit that standard. So, when we're making students do things, especially when we're teaching them or when we're going to deem them competent, we actually need to like hold them to that standard and make sure they really understand how to do it properly, because all you're doing otherwise is you're robbing the student of you're robbing the student of actually knowing how to do it properly. 2, you're letting down our entire industry, which hands out one-day forklift tickets, which, I'm sorry, if you've never driven a forklift before, you can't learn how to drive a forklift in a day. Like, if you've worked with forklifts before, yeah, then that's not a problem. But if you're an 18-year-old kid who's never worked in an environment before or knows absolutely nothing about the warehousing industry, you really can't learn how to drive a forklift properly in a day. You can maybe learn how to like basically operate it, but you're not going to know how to use it, on slippery grounds. You're not going to know how to use it in a whole bunch of different scenarios, and probably you're going to fall into lazy practices really, really quickly, which is how accidents occur. So we just need to we do need to make sure that students understand all of the steps that we go through, and indirect evidence is just a really good way of that. So as I said, like, having that job card where the student has like physically written out, okay, so I moved this piece of equipment from here to here at this time of day, and these were the hazards that I had to negotiate around, and these were my controls that I put in place to make sure of that, and this was the equipment that I had to use, and this was the location of where I had to find all of that sort of stuff. Like, just having the student go through that checklist in their own heads is a really, really good planning tool. But from a validation perspective, it's so much easier for me as the validator to turn around and go, okay, yeah, cool. So like, if I'm doing a validation on a piece of equipment and I can see the pre-starts there and I can see the job cards there, and then, the trainer is ticked to say that they've done everything correctly, I'm feeling a hell of a lot more comfortable in saying that they've done it right. Anyway, that's it. I've got like 6 seconds left. So thank you very much for listening to this series. If you've got any questions, just email through. Thanks a lot. Bye.